Hello you beautiful ancient people and welcome back to another video. So I'm sorry for the lack of uploads over this last couple of weeks. Yeah, I did not expect school to keep me as busy as it is doing currently, but luckily over this weekend I did actually find time to do stuff. And yeah, this I'm waving my hands around even though you can't see it because I don't have a face cam. But anyway, welcome to the largest redstone build that I have ever attempted. Yeah, it's pretty huge. If you have checked out my community post, you'll know that I actually had to force load 3 separate areas of this map in order to get it to work, just because what the max amount of chunks that you can force load is actually 100 chunks, and I needed 2.5 times that for this thing to be loaded completely. But yeah, basically what this is a word processor. Now, if you don't know what that is, don't worry, it's quite simple. I realize I've turned into the cliche of Redstone saying that it's quite simple without actually being simple. But anyways, this is actually, the concept is quite simple. Basically, all that it is it's a keyboard with a display. You type stuff on the keyboard, it shows up on the display. It sounds pretty simple in concept, but yeah, it's actually pretty difficult to make. Now, I've actually started the construction on this thing sometime in December. I'm not entirely sure of the date, but then when I basically completed it, I just had to hook up the keyboard to the display. And man, did that take forever. This is actually the third different method I used for connecting it up. I'll show you a little bit later on the previous iterations of the keyboard. But I finally settled for this one because I think it's probably the fastest, and yeah, it looks pretty cool. You can't argue with that. All of these redstone lines, it looks pretty cool. Now, the amazing thing about this is that I have broken the Bedrock engine multiple times with the creation of this. But the strange thing that I'm currently facing is this thing is actually slower than it is supposed to be. Let me show you. So I'll put on, if I remember, I'll put on the screen a side-by-side comparison of how long a piston should take to extend. As you can see, it takes a while to extend, and when you combine them with things like slime blocks, they take even longer. You know what I will do? I will type out a word and fast forward it so that it will be the speed that it would usually be if the game, if one tick was actually a tick like it is in normal Minecraft. But yeah, enough talking. Let me show you by typing something up here. So what I'll do first is just type up. Well, what can I type? I don't really know. Uh, I had some coffee earlier, but I mean, coffee's a pretty long word to type, and I'm not in the mood for that. So let's type tea. So yeah, as you can see, we have successfully typed the word tea. Now, that might seem pretty simple, but there's actually a lot of stuff going on in the background. But just for reference, let me type a single letter and you can see how long it takes when you don't actually, when I don't fast forward it and the lag and everything is included. So let's type the number 9, and now we wait forever. Now, the number 9 is in theory. Oh, that's number 0. Okay, so number 9 is in theory the digit that will take the longest to type because it sits at the end of the ROM. So it takes the most amount of time to move forward to the display. You'll understand better once I get to breaking down the actual ROMs back there. But what I tried to do to counter that was the inputs that's at the back of the ROMs. I tried to connect them up to the keyboard first so that they have less distance to travel and thus have less repeaters from the input to that input. And the ones that are in the front and faster, their input from the keyboard to the display input are a little bit longer to compensate for that. But yeah, so basically this thing has all, how many letters are in the alphabet? 26? Yeah, I think 26, but it has all 26 letters of the alphabet as well as a space button and the letters 1 to 9. And then I have these two extra buttons up here. This one is to reload the chunks. I'll explain that now. And this one is to just clear the display. Now, what this reload broken chunks is it's this blue circuit. And for some reason, I don't know, it doesn't happen every single time. But every now and then when you load the world, these, if I'm correct, it's either these two or these two, they don't get loaded properly. And basically what happens is these torches don't turn off even though they are being powered. So this redstone line will be powered, but this torch will still remain on. So I have a theory this might be a chunk border or something, and that's causing the loading problem. But as I said, it doesn't happen every single time, so I'm not sure. So let's now that that's out of the way, let me show you how this thing works. So once we type a letter in here, we have this set of wires over here. Now, like I said in the beginning, this is actually the third iteration of this. The first one that I used was a bus system. Now, if you don't know what a bus system is, you don't need to feel bad. I actually made a bus system without knowing it's called a bus system, and once I finished it, someone told me, "Oh, nice, you made a bus system." I was like, "What?" Okay, so if we jump over to my advanced redstone test world, then I can show you exactly how my bus system works. Now, I'm not going to go into too much depth. Well, I can't say that word, depth. I think that's right. But yeah, I'm not going to go into too much depth. I can't say that word. Just because I want to make a separate video on this because it's pretty cool. So I started experimenting with this one over here, which basically just uses pulse length to or signal strength to select an output, but that's limited to 15. And over here we have the actual bus system. Now, how this works is basically there's a bunch of pulses, or this single redstone line will actually be able to give out all 9 of these outputs. Like you see, that one is powered. Now, when we power this center one, the center one will get powered all through this one redstone line. And if I'm feeling lucky, you can even power a bunch of different outputs at once, just like that. Now, how this actually works is by measuring the time between pulses. So I'll send out a base pulse and then wait a set amount of time before sending another pulse. And then this little decoder over here will measure the amount of time that was between those two pulses and thus determine an output on this little output over here. Now, the reason I didn't actually settle for this is because it does take a little bit of a while, and this is just 9 outputs. So if I want to do 3 times this amount of output, then it will take 3 times the amount of time that it currently does. And yeah, combine that with the repeaters that I will need to place in to extend the strength, that will end up being a long time. And yeah, I was trying to find the fastest way to do it, not the most compact way to do it. And that's why I settled for just running the normal lines. The next one that I used was very similar to this, but it was a lot closer to one another. Basically, what I did was I'll have these two lines like this, and then I'll have a third line over there, and then just a block on top of that. And once I actually connected up all of the digits to it, but it was extremely difficult to translate it from that into the gray circuit over there because they were extremely close to one another, as well as being actually stacked on top of one another. And yeah, I just decided to scrap all of that, so I slash full aired the entire area and started over again. Now, believe it or not, this white circuit I did completely yesterday. I built it up, and I'm not joking when I tell you that I started 9 o'clock in the morning and ended 7:30. That's how long it took to lay down all of this white concrete powder with the redstone line and the repeaters and everything. This took insanely long. But yeah, I'm actually convinced this might have taken almost the same amount of time that some of the actual circuitry in here took. But it's not really difficult, it was just a giant grind. Okay, so let's start out with a single cell to explain this thing. Now, now the display consists, if I'm correct, out of 32 cells, and each cell has its own built-in display as well as a ROM. This isn't the best way to do it. Ideally, what you want to do is have one ROM to work on all of the displays, but I wasn't sure how to do it. And once I figured out how to do it, this thing was pretty much already done, so I didn't want to do it over again. But I might in the future make an improved version of this with a singular ROM for the entire system. Now, for those of you who don't exactly know what a ROM is, basically, if I remember correctly, it's a read-only memory, and basically it's just these hard-coded information that can get transported into the display over here. So the ones, the two, the A to Z, basically, all of that is hard coded into these redstone lines, and they can be activated at once. So if we fly over to this side of the world really quickly, you can see I have a singular cell here, and then I have another cell down here. Now, this was actually the first one that I made, and it's a 7 segment display because I thought 7 segments would be enough to actually display letters. But then I realized down the line while I was busy programming this one that some letters, like for example K or even T to some extent, won't be able to display on this properly. And that's when I came up with the 9 segment display over here. As you can see, it has 9 segments: 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and that gives us a little bit more control over it. But yeah, this thing is actually incredibly compact, and it took me a while to make, and I'm proud to announce I made this completely from scratch. I was originally going to use this design that I found on YouTube that uses signal strengths to determine which letter to display, but then I realized that would only give me a maximum of 15 outputs. This thing, on the other hand, can be infinitely tileable for how many displays you want this thing to be able to display. I might actually do a tutorial on this thing in the future, just because it's so useful and it's so incredibly compact in comparison with other existing designs out there. How these cells actually work is this green circuit is connected up to each of these segments, and then this blue circuit is actually the memory of how the letter will look. And how that is achieved is by using these torches. And as you can see, each letter has a different setup of torches, and these torches power different green lines, powering different lamps, and thus giving us control over what will be displayed when and how. So now that that's out of the way, let's move on to the actual word processor. Okay, so from this angle, the first thing you'll notice is there's a couple extra circuits in there. Oh, the main cell consists out of a green line and a blue line, And over here, we introduced another 3 lines, aka, oh no, it's 4 lines, sorry. The orange line, the red line, the yellow line, and the gray line. Now, the orange line is responsible for activating the output or the input. I'm not really sure which one to call it. But basically, when you press A, for example, it will activate the A, it will the A line will deactivate if that makes sense. And yeah, basically when I type a letter, this torch will turn on, activating a bunch of torch towers and a T flip-flop, and eventually powering an output. Now, so that's what the orange line does. The yellow line works hand in hand with the orange line, since it is basically just the torch tower that's responsible for activating the input. Now, what you might notice is that there isn't actually a block between the T flip-flop dropper and the torch. And the reason for that is that they are connected via a piston. And what this is for is basically this allows us to pick a specific cell to type into. So if you fly over here and see which one is active currently, okay, this cell is currently active. What you'll see is that the red line here is activating these pistons pushing blocks underneath these torch towers, while these ones remain retracted without a block. So basically, what this means is that we can power all of these torches at once, and only this specific cell will actually give us an output. Yeah, so that's pretty cool. The way that I actually did that was by using droppers, hoppers, and basically just moving an item forward and forward. So as you can see, we have a dropper over here, and once we move over to the next cell, this dropper will be activated by an observer line at the back there. You can barely see it, but I can't actually get in there. But that observer line will power the dropper, spitting it into the hopper chain and carrying it to the next one, thus selecting the next cell. And there's an identical circuit to that on the other end that's responsible for the flickering the redstone lamp, so that you know which one is currently selected. Now, how the flickering works is actually pretty cool in my opinion. What I did was I have a comparator over there that reads an input from the dropper, and if we can move over to the other side, you'll see, if I can actually get out here, yeah, the lack of what do you call it, spectator mode in Bedrock made this extremely difficult to make, because you have to find ways around it. But yeah, as you can see, this item will activate this comparator, deactivating this torch, allowing an item to be moved between these two hoppers, activating this comparator, which will temporarily turn off this comparator because it's in subtract mode, reactivating reactivating this torch, which will activate this, which will deactivate this torch and cause it to flicker on it. I'm not explaining this very well, but basically it's just a mini clock that gets toggled. That's probably a better way to explain it. Now up for the gray circuit. The gray circuit is actually the clearing circuit. And it took a while to come up with this thing, because the way that it clears pretty easily. All that I need to do is run a line over these T flip-flops to turn them all down. And that's why these aren't really a complete T flip-flop. It's basically a T flip-flop, but you need an input from two different places. Like, it will toggle from when you power this bottom one, and it will toggle once you power this top one again. And that's why when you power this top one, even though there isn't an item in here, it will not turn on because this bottom dropper does not get powered. But the thing that made it difficult was, now that all of the letters get turned off, I need to somehow move the cursor back to the start, and that is what took a while to make. Basically, what I ended up doing was creating this circuit over here. Now, this is a big mess, but it's the only way that I could get it to work. So I'm going to try and explain to you what's happening over here. So what this red line does is, like I said, it's responsible for, say, and I actually never explained what the red circuit does. Basically, the red circuit is responsible for moving the cursor over to the next slot. So what I need to do is I need to spam power the all of the reds all of the red all of the red wires to move this thing over to the other side, but that's actually extremely time consuming to do. But so I tried to make it a little bit faster by using ice roads. As you can see, I have an ice road down there, and through running through the middle, you can't actually see it, but what they do is once the cursor reaches the ends, it runs through an ice road. The item gets spit out into an ice road that flows all the way to this side, which drops it back into the system. Now, if we are busy clearing it, then these repeaters at the bottom here will actually be locked and spitting them out into an ice route over here that travels all the way to the right and all the way back up and all the way back there to the left again. Now that I think about it, I'm not actually sure why I moved it to the right. Oh yeah, yeah. Never mind. I moved it all the way to the right here so that when it's just normally typing, you will actually be able to spit out a item into this elevator to reset it without actually resetting it, just move the cursor forward. And I'm pretty sure I'm making no sense at the moment. But back to the gray circuit where we're starting out, how this thing works is once you clear it, this T flip-flop will toggle activating this comparator. Now what that does is it turns off this torch, activating this torch, which will activate this little clock over here, which will cause this torch to flicker, which will cause this torch to flicker, which will spam power or will like repeatedly power these red circuits, both that one and the one at the bottom to move the cursor forwards. Now, simultaneously, what will happen is we will power this pulse extender here that will lock this hopper as well as hopper over there. And that's because we need to turn this thing off at some point. So once the cursor gets moved all the way back to the stop cell over here, what would have actually happened was it will skip this first cell and move over to the second cell, but we can't have that. So what I did was I actually locked these hoppers for a couple of seconds or for probably just 2 seconds, and that gives us enough time for the clock to be completely deactivated and stopping the moving of the cursor to the next cell, which will keep it in the first cell. Now, how that thing is activated is basically I just have a comparator here reading from this hopper. So once the item gets traveled through the hopper, it will toggle the T flip-flop, turning the clock off again. Hopefully that made sense. So yeah, that is pretty much it. It took a while to make. It's the biggest thing that I've ever made. Hopefully, I kind of explained it in a way that made sense. I really doubt it, but it's the best I could do. If you have any questions, feel free to ask them in the comments. I'll try to answer them because I'm pretty sure that some people are going to have questions because, yeah, this is not a great explanation that I gave, but it's the one that I did actually give. And oh, yeah, can I just tell you how epic this thing looks from the bottom? Just look how amazing all of these wires look like that. Tell me that does not look amazing. But yeah, what I actually want to do is I want to create a website where you can download all of my worlds that are like these. So, but I'm currently still struggling to find time to do that. But if you're watching it sometime in the future, feel free to go check out the pinned comment. Once I have the website up and running and you can download this thing, it will be in the pinned comment, a link to the website. So if you're watching this in like 2020, if you're watching this in like 2432 for some reason, then yeah, there will probably be a download link in the script in the comments. But yeah, hopefully you guys found this video pretty interesting. And yeah, feel free to leave a like and to subscribe if you're new around here. But thanks for watching, guys, and I will see all of you again in the future with a brand new video. Bye!